In this video I'm going to be comparing a few of my favourite amps and seeing which one I like for a jazz guitar tone, specifically for a Fender Telecaster, but to be honest with you, most guitars will kind of have similar sounds through all of these amps, especially if you're recording them with a mic right in front of the speaker, as what I'm doing in this video. So if you're new around here, my name is Jamie Holroyd and I like to teach jazz guitar lessons online. If you're interested in learning jazz guitar, then I've got a free, it's absolutely free, beginner jazz guitar course which you can enroll in by clicking on the link below. So let's begin with the video and see which amps we like to use for a Fender Jazz Telecaster Tone. For all the sound samples in this video, I'm basically going to be using my old road-worn Telecaster. This is a guitar that I'm very comfortable and very familiar with, so to be honest with you, when I was recording, faffing around, setting amps up and stuff, I just wanted something that I knew really well, and because this is kind of a small room, having my Telecaster out was just easier. It's super lightweight and it's just easier to have around rather than having a bunch of big bulky arched up guitar cases. So this guitar has gauge 10 strings on, 10 to 46 strings. They're quite old, they need changing, but I like the sound of well played in strings personally, especially on a Telecaster. Kind of gives you that dead, Tal Fowler-like sound. The pots have been upgraded on this. The neck pickup is a Seymour Duncan Alnico Pro 2, and that's all we're going to be listening to actually. So it doesn't really matter what the bridge pickup is, but in case you're curious, that's some kind of a broadcaster pickup as well, really. So yeah, let's kind of get on with listening to the amps and see what we think about that. But before we have a listen, actually, I'll probably just tell you a little bit about each amp so you have a little bit of background as to what each amplifier is. This amp is my Roland 20 GX, and I've done a video on this one before, so you probably know a little bit about it if you're a subscriber of this channel. But this is like one of the amps that I basically pick up and take to go to jam sessions, small gigs, things like that, just because it is super light. It's definitely the lightest amp that I have. And basically, for jazz gigs at least, I only use the clean channel there, as you can see on camera, and that's what I use. So this particular amp is discontinued. They still make the 10 watt version of this, but I'm yet to find out if that would actually be loud enough to take to jam sessions and gigs. So you can find these used. They're very inexpensive amps, and obviously the Roland Clean, that kind of, is it the JC Clean sound that you get on Rolands, is kind of one of the industry standard jazz guitar sounds. So yeah, this will be one amp that we'll be checking out. This definitely has an unfair disadvantage because it's got an 8-inch speaker, whereas the other amps have much bigger speakers. They've got a 10-inch and a 12-inch speaker. So, already it's kind of probably not going to sound the best because of that, but there's definitely some pros which I like about this amp, which I'll discuss as I have also told you about the other two amplifiers. The next amplifier on the list is a Peavey Backstage 50. So this has got a 10-inch speaker on it, in comparison to the 8-inch which the Cube has. These are also discontinued, but a lot of jazz guitar players like Peavey amps. They've got kind of a certain sound which is maybe a little bit warmer than the Roland Cubes amps, and they're basically built like tanks and they last forever. So I think this is probably, at least from the 80s, maybe from the 1990s. And this is a really cool, underrated amp. You can pick these up really cheap and they have killer jazz sounds, as you'll hear in a minute. So that's the second amp, the Peavey Backstage 50. The Polytone amp on this comparison is an old Mini Brute 2. This is from the late 80s, maybe even the early 90s. It's the one that you see Joe Pass on the cover of the Polytone catalogue with. I think Louis Stewart played one that looked identical to this. So this is a really cool amp. This has got the 12-inch speaker. So already I guess there's kind of one advantage there, that this has got the biggest speaker. I think it technically does have 2 channels, but the distortion channel, as anybody on a Polytone knows, is not particularly good, so bear that in mind. Obviously we're not going to be having any distorted sounds on this clip, but that'll be the final amp, the Polytone Mini Brute 2, the one with the reverb on. But so yeah, check these sound samples out and let me know what you think. I forgot to mention that on the guitar itself, basically for all of the recorded examples, I turn the volume down ever so slightly, maybe to 9 or something like that. This Telecaster and none of my Fenders have treble bleeds on. I don't like treble bleeds. So a tip from a friend of mine was just to remove them and get a slightly darker sound when you knock off the volume. It's a very easy thing to do. If your guitar has a treble bleed and you're not particularly fussed about playing other styles, then I like to take those off to get a jazzier sound. Of course, that was completely not my tip. That was a tip from a really good friend of mine. And in terms of the tone, I'd probably have this down to maybe 6 or 7 or something like that, at least 7. It's hard to see, obviously, without numbers like what a Strat has. So it's definitely not back and picking with a very light touch and usually a thicker plectrum. It's the same kind of plectrum that Barney Kessel used, which is one of these kind of purple Dunlop picks as well is what I like to use, but I don't think it makes that much difference. A quick note on the actual recording process is that I basically recorded these amps directly through the microphone. I didn't add any post EQ, nothing like that. If I was recording these for one of my own performances or something like that, or a demo vid, I probably would EQ them even more, maybe change some of the reverb, so you're literally hearing just the microphone picking these up. So I could have made each of the amps sound better, but and of course when you hear a mic, you know, just in front of an amp, you kind of hearing that one sound. It's not like I've got another mic which is picking up the, you know, the room sound or anything like that. And of course bear in mind that with any video, it's just basically a video. How the amps feel and respond is something that I can't really, you know, put across in a video. So really what you're best off doing is, if you're serious about getting an amp or something like that, is trying them out in person if you can, or having a returns policy, because how they feel compared to how they sound on a video, especially played on something like jazz, which in comparison to say blues or rock, you get most of the jazz sound by how you pick, really. And you know, part of me was thinking, I maybe did a couple of takes on Round Midnight, which was one of the chord melody pieces. In my head, I'm just kind of thinking the tone's getting better as I'm going along because I keep practicing it and playing it more. So yeah, that's another thought to consider also. There's also a few people that like to know my thoughts and my experiences on amps. Well, I'm constantly learning, constantly figuring out things, and sometimes what you think is good sometimes can really change. I actually recorded another video a few months ago, and I said that, you know, my amp journey was over, I'm done with amps, and here I am doing it all again. So never say never, it's kind of an ongoing thing. So that's why I guess I'm slightly reluctant to share my thoughts, because they're always changing. But right now, at the time of recording this, well, they all have pros and cons, don't they? And sometimes the reason why you use one amp might be very personal and subjective to you. So, for example, the Roland Cube with the 8-inch speaker, that is by far the lightest amp that I have. So, and to me, the sound, whilst it might not be as thick or full as some of the other amps, it's certainly good enough, and it can sound really good. That kind of extra bit of clarity and maybe high end that you get from a Roland can really cut through well in a mix, when you're playing with other guitar players, when you're playing in a band. So I do like the Roland amps. I know they have their pitfalls, but they are usually very light, they have good reverb, and they do have a good clean sound, and they sound good with anything. They're super reliable, which is why I always now seem to have one in my collection. The Polytone, that's a great sound, really thick sound for single notes, sorry, really warm. It just kind of gets you into that classic jazz guitar tone immediately. Very cool amp, and a great amp if you can ever find them. The downsides to polytones may be the reverb, which can be a little bit annoying. If you're playing in a room with good natural reverb, it's not really a problem, but if you need anything from an amp, if you're playing in a particularly dead sounding room and you want a bit of reverb, then the reverb from polytones tends to not be particularly good, in my opinion. So if you're willing to carry a reverb pedal around and stuff and use that, then sure, they're cool, they're fine. But for me, I just really like simplicity. You know, I like just having one guitar, one amp, and not really having to deal with a reverb pedal. So that is a definite con for me, but like I said, for some people, you know, it really doesn't matter. And certainly polytones, at one point at least, were the industry standard for jazz guitar players. The Peavey is a new kid on the block. That's the amp that I have the least experience with. Many moons ago, I used to have one of those old Peavey trans tube amps, which, you know, even back then, I hadn't been playing jazz very long when I got that amp. I thought that was a really cool sounding amp. So Peavey's always kind of been at the back of my mind as a cool amp. Lots of jazz guitar players like those classic 30 tube amps, but they tend to be a bit on the heavier side. That particular solid state amp is really nice, I think. It kind of, it's apples versus oranges. You know, the kind of polytone gives you a very dark jazz sound, and that's kind of all you get from that, whereas the Peavey, you get kind of more of a natural sound, which obviously makes it more useful for playing other things. If you're playing you know, on the middle pickup, for example, on a Telecaster, then you've got a much more usable sound than what you've got on a polytone. The reverb is very good on the Peavey, and the tone is very thick and warm on the Peavey as well. And of course, you know, you can find them also, you know, quite regularly, many kind of old Peavey solid state amps on the used market. So that, you know, they're worth kind of searching out and checking out if you can. So there will be my own thoughts on all three jazz guitar amps. So that concludes my amp comparison. What do you think is the best amp sound for the Fender Telecaster, or in fact any jazz guitar? Well, I'm asking you. I just wanted to do a Telecaster because you're really going to get the sound of the amp in comparison to, say, an arch top. It's kind of a more complex kind of thing, and I think that, personally speaking, when I'm playing an arch top guitar, the amps are much less picky. I find that I can even play through a PA with an arch top, and as long as you've got a bit of reverb, you can get a pretty good sound. So that's why I thought it might be more interesting to do with a Telecaster. Of course, I could do one with an arch top as well if that would be something that you guys would be interested in. Just let me know. So yeah, if you did like this video and you found it useful, please give this video a like, subscribe to this channel, and let me know what you thought in the comment section below.